May 2008. Robert Downey Jr. suited up for the first time and decided that
I am Iron Man.
2 months later, Christopher Nolan delivered the masterpiece that is The Dark Knight with arguably the best villain performance of all time.
Why so serious?
People loved superhero movies. The box office was proof of that in the late 2000s and early 2010s.
Assemble.
Until they didn't.
It's a technicality.
So what made us love this,
Thank you.
but not this? Psychologically, what made us infatuated with this,
That's all it is, Miles. A leap of faith.
but detest this?
And when you take on the responsibility, a great hour will come.
Superheroes provide a one-of-a-kind escape into a fantasy where nothing is impossible. They transport us to worlds filled with extraordinary powers, epic battles, and larger-than-life characters.
The spot.
Whether it's flying through the sky, wielding incredible powers, or saving the world from cataclysmic threats, the fantasy aspect of superheroes offers a mental break from reality, providing not just entertainment, but also a way to dream beyond the constraints of the real world.
What is real?
And yet, despite these unrealistic, fantastical elements, even superheroes still grapple with personal challenges and moral dilemmas that make them deeply relatable to us. They embody human struggles such as identity crises, ethical conflicts, and personal loss, which resonate with viewers on an emotional level.
Yeah, it means nothing to me.
This relatability helps to humanize these larger-than-life characters, allowing us to see parts of ourselves in our favorite heroes.
Tell everyone to hang on!
It's this perfect blend of fantasy and reality that makes superheroes so exciting yet still relatable. And this recipe was successful, very successful,
Wakanda forever!
and for a long time.
Wakanda forever!
But somewhere along the line, we got older, and what was exciting and relatable to us evolved.
It was perfect.
And instead of evolving along with us, they've somehow devolved.
Patronizing me.
Even though the plot was always a bit formulaic, the average superhero movie was still fun to watch and at least satisfactory for the amount of prior build-up and hype. And as always, there were still a few diamonds in the rough that were fantastic films in any genre, such as The Dark Knight, Logan, or Into the Spider-Verse. But recently, the average superhero movie is borderline unwatchable.
Probably not.
A huge advantage with superhero movies that utilizes the fantasy of it all is the undeniable scale. The scale of world building, scale of the characters, the scale of the dilemmas and threats.
Avengers!
Lately, it seems that the scale of superhero productions is working against itself. Not every movie needs a multiverse-ending calamity.
You'll be wiping out entire timelines.
We shouldn't need to watch the entire catalog of MCU movies and TV shows just to understand what's happening in a new movie. The stakes are supposedly higher with every new movie that's coming out, but they aren't real enough for the characters, and even less so with the audience. So if anything, these phony high stakes do not create nearly as much tension as the studios are hoping for.
The Eternals serving their missions across the galaxies will learn from your success.
Nowadays, the studios are too afraid to lower these superficial stakes a little bit. Not everything has to be
an Avengers level threat.
In Guardians of the Galaxy 3, instead of fighting more space giants and whatnot to save the multiverse, they're just trying to save their friend. And that means something to the characters and to us.
We're going to the new world?
And this is not to say that big superficial threats and evil master plans are just forbidden now. The stakes need to be high on a deep level as well, not just on the surface. For example, in season 2 of Loki, yes, the entire fate of the multiverse was on his hands, but this time it's actually meaningful because the writers actually spent time to make sure we are psychologically tuned and emotionally invested. Loki's demons seemed real because he was struggling with pretty damn hard moral dilemmas and the threat of losing his friends.
What do I do?
I mean, the showrunners managed to pull off an "I spent millennia learning quantum physics."
Obi, how long will it take me to know everything that you know about mechanics, physics, and engineering?
just because the stakes were high yet believable. Psychologically speaking, when the threats seem to grow exponentially more dangerous with each movie, and every new character being exponentially more powerful, things get blown way too out of proportion. The scale of it all is starting to make things lose meaning. It's the same psychological effect we see with physical scales. We don't realize how big an object is until you put a human next to it. As soon as the human is no longer physically visible, all scale loses meaning to us. It doesn't really matter how many suns our galaxy can hold, because we can't even comprehend how big the sun truly is. We need something to ground these stories. Otherwise, they don't psychologically mean anything to us. You can't just say the villain is going to make 1 trillion universes explode. You have to show us what that would actually entail. Maybe a frightened family or grieving friends. I know it's counterintuitive, but sometimes the bigger something gets, the less significant it becomes. Another crucial aspect of the fantasy is the exciting plots. Superhero movies allow for all sorts of outrageous plot devices and unexpected twists and turns.
No.
For some reason, these recent superhero movies aren't even trying to use fantasy to its advantage when coming up with these plots. I mean, at least they try to scale things up, though failing pretty spectacularly. But the plot in every movie is so bad now that it sounds like a bot wrote the script.
When it's finally my turn!
It's like if someone asked ChatGPT to write a script and then prompted it to add some minor twists or some weird plot devices to call it a day.
It's a zombie!
We used to have amazing stories even if it wasn't Christopher Nolan directing a Batman movie. Captain America the Winter Soldier was insane, with Bucky as the Winter Soldier and S.H.I.E.L.D. being revealed as Hydra.
Bucky? Who the hell is Bucky?
Logan is my favorite superhero movie of all time, simply because of its heartbreaking story. Emotions were at an all-time high watching this movie because the plot was that good. Even a team-up movie like Avengers Infinity War had quite a few twists and turns. Who actually expected the movie to end with Thanos wiping out half the universe?
He did it.
Recently, every single movie uses the same formula, rebranded with a different face, with a slightly different power, fighting a slightly different cause. It's always some superhero fighting some bad guy, losing until they have some epiphany, and then ending the fight easily with a catchphrase like,
Scooby-Doo this!
The movies with a proper stories are few and far in between. Movies like The Batman,
I'm vengeance.
or Across the Spider-Verse.
Look at me!
These movies show that it is possible and not actually that difficult to have a good plot. I mean, I don't think I have to say anything extra about how important a plot is to a movie. At this point, it's not even about the psychology of it all with the plot. I mean, it's kind of the bare minimum for a story to have, well, a plot. One technique that has always been around for fictional movies is using devices like violence. I remember Marvel taking a leap of faith with Ryan Reynolds' Deadpool, and it performed massively in the box office.
Any last words?
For some reason, the big studios are too afraid to make R-rated movies because they think it won't make them as much money. But that's not even true anymore. Just look at Deadpool and Wolverine, smashing the box office right now.
Welcome to the MCU, by the way. You're joining at a bit of a low point.
A combination of the audience growing up and, while every other superhero movie being atrocious, made Deadpool and Wolverine so successful. He performed better than anyone really expected. This is not to say that every superhero movie needs to be R-rated with a bunch of violence and sex and gore and whatnot. There are still plenty of successful movies targeted toward a broader age spectrum. But when done right, violence is a really easy device to appeal to the fantasy of it all. Shows like The Boys and Invincible
I still have you.
uses violence, gore, and other mature techniques to really easily tap in the fantastical element of superhero genre. Psychologically speaking, most people don't get to see this every day, nor do they want to. Thus, having it in a superhero movie allows us to experience something that we don't normally get to experience, plus a further bolsters the idea that this is actually fiction and a fantasy, it's not really happening in real life. The second reason is that it can be cathartic. Seeing some, albeit unsightly scenes once in a while, especially violence, can be cathartic to whatever is going on in our lives at the moment. Another one of these crafty little techniques that works really well to appeal to the fantastical side of things is humor. We use humor to deflect and to process. That's why humor works really well in these settings.
Sorry, I just have one question. Who are you? Who is she? What the hell's going on? And can I go back to jail now?
It tells us that what's happening on the big screen isn't actually going to affect us physically. But recently, it seems like every single movie has that same type of humor. That overdone, one quip, semi-joking thing that every character does in the MCU, what we now know as Marvel humor.
Yeah, no, it's a whole thing. I'll tell you later.
Humor is important to break the tension and to keep things light.
Is that everyone?
But you wanted more?
But that doesn't mean every character should joke around.
Yeah, but given the choice between the archer with the mohawk and several bug-themed crime fighters or one of the most powerful magic wielders on the planet, it's an easy call.
And it also doesn't mean that every character should have the same sense of humor or the same type of comedy. When it works for that character in that context, it is really effective.
Whoa! Pump the hate brakes, Fox and Friends. I'm just surprised anyone would date you, especially Pinkie Pie from My Little Pony.
But that doesn't mean every superhero should be joking around like Deadpool.
Want the kids back? I'll be back in a minute.
In fact, in Deadpool and Wolverine, Wolverine is a serious character who doesn't really joke around at all.
One more word. Please give me one.
And the entire movie was filled with jokes. After all, it is a action comedy. It would have been so easy for the writers to mistakenly give Wolverine a few jokes, but they realized that, hang on, characters actually have different backstories and different personalities. Shocking, I know. Humor in unexpected contexts can appeal to the fantasy of it all. But when it's not done right, it keeps us from psychologically taking anything seriously. Moving away from the fantasy, the villains in superhero movies are one of the most crucial aspects in keeping the story grounded and relatable. Especially now that we've grown up a little, villains are starting to play a much more important role. Superhero movies with bad villains were always extremely terrible. Even with every other aspect of the movie being comparable, if the villain was not realistic, the entire movie wasn't relatable enough for the audience to develop any meaningful connections. Writers are starting to place less and less importance on villains, which is very apparent with the amount of screen time they are getting.
You're too late.
I mean, there wasn't even a villain in She-Hulk, which is why the whole show felt like a poof of nothing.
This is a mess.
On the other hand, if you take a sneak peek at some of the successful franchises, they will have extremely well-written villains. Invincible's Omni-Man.
You'll live to see this world crumble to dust and blow away!
Or Kane from Loki.
I know it all.
Villains keep things grounded and ensures that with the epic scale of everything, at least their thoughts, emotions, and motivations can still be understood and stay relatable. For example, Titan from Megamind acts much more like a villain than Megamind ever did, which is what made Megamind becoming a hero so believable and so human, even though Megamind is a giant blue-headed alien.
Oh, you're a villain, all right. Just not a super one.
Of course, again, this doesn't mean that every single villain should be scaled down and have less ambitious or evil master plans. Like, for example, Thanos. His goal was literally to wipe out half of life in the universe. That certainly wasn't a small or acceptable feat, but because he has somewhat reasonable motivations and backstories, it was believable and thus made the character all the more real and terrifying.
It needs correction.
You don't know that!
And equally, it can still have straight up evil villains, like the High Evolution, as long as they are developed enough to be believable as real characters, not just a plot device.
Incinerate them.
It's a shame that villains have gotten such a massive downgrade in recent years. I still can't believe they managed to destroy Gore the God Butcher, who was played by freaking Christian Bale.
What a neat story!
Superheroes have to fight villains. You can't actually have a hero without a villain. Therefore, you can't have a good superhero movie without a decent villainous representation. I mean, sometimes the villains can even outshine the heroes. The Joker?
You wanna know how I got these scars?
Killmonger?
Because they know death is better than bondage.
Omni-Man?
Everyone and everything you know will be gone!
Homelander?
I mean, sure, I'll lose everything, but then I'll have nothing to lose.
It doesn't mean we're evil when we relate more to the villains. It means that the movies have finally successfully created a character that we can actually psychologically attune to. So now that we realize how important a villain is, how does one actually write relatable villains and heroes? The key isn't to make them bland with no personality or culture, hoping that, I don't know, anyone and everyone can relate to them. Most of the time, instead of getting a blank canvas, you get a character that isn't at all realistic and couldn't possibly exist as an individual. It's just there as a plot device. The key to bringing to life realistic characters is to treat them like a real person with real thoughts and feelings, a real personality and a real backstory. Like if you think about it, how relatable were the lives of our favorite heroes and villains at a face value? Iron Man was still a
genius, billionaire, playboy, philanthropist.
Superman was an invincible alien. The Joker was a literal psycho with severe mental disabilities.
There is no punchline.
But they felt like real characters. They seemed so, I don't know, human in a way. And that's what these movies should be striving towards. Not some blank canvas that will satisfy Twitter and the work police, but a real character. We can relate to different aspects of their journeys or bits of their personality, even if our culture and our paths were completely different. A purple alien with actual thoughts and feelings, albeit not the most morally sound,
They called me a madman.
is still more relatable than a human with zero personality or struggles.
I've been fighting with one arm tied behind my back.
When someone like Logan, who struggled with loss all his life, sacrifices himself, it's sad because he seemed real.
This is what it feels like.
When Homelander, who was physically and emotionally abused and isolated as a child, threatens someone's life, it's terrifying because he seemed real.
You know, I really do want to share with you why I called this the bad room.
When Killmonger, who was fueled with anger, hatred, and revenge from the murder of his father, threatens war against the world, it's believable because he seemed real.
I'm the king now.
These feel like real characters with real trauma and actual development that we can relate to. We can understand psychologically what these characters are going through, and it's this empathy that gets us so emotionally invested with these characters and these stories. As we grow up, we start to appreciate stuff on a slightly deeper level. We see the world in more than just black and white, and our tastes in entertainment reflect that.
And as long as there are those that remember what was, there will always be those that are unable to accept what can be.
Going back and re-watching some of the earlier superhero bangers, it's pretty clear that the movies with some layering and deeper themes were the most memorable and rewatchable ones.
Well, you look nervous.
No one is expecting to find any inner peace from watching superhero flicks, but those that made an effort were simply that much better at portraying a more realistic world.
If it was me dying on the sidewalk, you'd walk right over me.
Nowadays, all of that higher level thinking has been replaced by Marvel humor and CGI. The most you can squeeze out of Disney is some BS about family, or some woke propaganda that isn't even remotely genuine. Fortunately, there are still a few examples here and there that they can learn from. Invincible is tackling quite a few moral and philosophical ideas.
What will you have after 500 years?
The Boys is a satire of pretty much anything controversial or political in the modern world.
So what, they're all starving, but one of them's got a fucking cell phone?
I mean, we can't really talk about deeper themes and layering if we don't talk about Loki. I mean, the show is straight up quick-firing, existential and philosophical questions eons beyond our scope of thinking. What is free will, and does it even exist?
But what good is free will if everyone's dead?
Is the sacrifice of the few worth it for the survival of the many?
And who are you to say we can't die trying?
I mean, when one TV show chucks in the trolley problem as a fun thinking exercise, and the other is talking about how being the average lawyer is more infuriating than decades of unbelievable trauma.
So I'm an expert at controlling my anger because I do it infinitely more than you.
It's suddenly not that hard to understand how the show with the time-traveling Norse god was more believable and realistic than the one about the average LA lawyer. For the film to spark any sort of psychological connection or leave a lasting impression, there must be something beneath the surface of the characters and plots. Right now, most of the crap that gets churned out is pretty two-dimensional, and thus not engaging and very forgetful. Superhero movies used to be the perfect blend of reality and fantasy. They were epic in scale. They had interesting storylines.
Miles?
They weren't afraid to use violence at times.
Ow.
And they were funny.
That's what.
They had fantastic villains.
I am inevitable.
They created lasting emotional connections.
Iron Man.
And some of them still had pretty deep themes embedded in them, considering it was just a superhero movie.
Nobody thinks what it's like to be the other guy.
But that golden age seems to have passed. New movies are not fantastical enough to be exciting, nor realistic enough to be relatable. Yes, there are a few good movies and TV shows every now and then, but the average superhero movie is borderline unwatchable. Yes, as we've grown up, our psychology has changed, but the big studios have simply failed to adapt properly. If anything, they have devolved. So those are my thoughts on why we were so psychologically infatuated with superheroes and why we're not anymore. If I have a look at my personal top 5, they all have these fantastical and realistic elements that most modern superhero movies are missing. Let me know what your top 5 is down below and if any of them were actually made in the last 3 years. If you like this video and would like to see more content like this, digesting the psychology behind different aspects of pop culture, consider subscribing to the channel. That's it from me. I hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you all next time.